Fired at the Billionaire Gala. The first time I realized a room could go silent without anyone raising their voice. It was because a man in a custom tuxedo unlocked his phone with a thumbprint and moved $1 billion like he was turning off a lamp. I'm a woman who's spent her entire career learning to read people the way other people read price charts, and even I didn't see that moment coming the way it came, clean and fast, like a knife sliding out of a sheath. It started the way all professional disasters start, with champagne, a smile that didn't reach someone's eyes, and the phrase, "just a quick chat." I'd been with Halcyon Ridge Wealth for 11 years, long enough to watch the firm's logo evolve, the conference rooms get renamed after donors, and the partners get younger while still somehow acting older. My work didn't sparkle. It didn't have the Instagram shine of deal flow and growth verticals. My work was the kind that keeps the lights on when the glitter burns out. I managed relationships, the kind where one wrong word could cost you a decade of trust and a number so big it stopped feeling like money. The kind where you don't win the client, you earn the right to keep them. There was one relationship that mattered more than the rest. Internally, we called them Redwood. Not their name, never their name, because confidentiality was our religion and fear was our choir. Redwood Family Office wasn't just a client. They were the client. Billions under advisement, multi-generational complexity, a patriarch whose signature could calm markets in his little corner of the world. They didn't just pay fees, they anchored our credibility. When Redwood stayed, other families followed. When Redwood attended our events, other prospects said yes, because proximity to power is a drug and everyone wants a hit. I was their dedicated manager, their point person, their constant. When their daughter got divorced and didn't want her ex to know where the money went, I was the one who mapped the new structure without moving a headline. When their son decided he wanted to do philanthropy seriously and nearly poured 8 figures into an unvetted nonprofit run by a charming idiot, I was the one who redirected the generosity into something that wouldn't collapse under a scandal 3 years later. When the patriarch's health took a turn and his assistant called at 2 a.m. because a rumor had reached the wrong cousin, I was the one who picked up on the first ring, voice calm, questions precise, no judgment, no panic. That's the thing about being trusted by people who have everything. They don't trust easily, and once they do, they don't like to be surprised. My name is Marin Caldwell, and I manage the kind of money that makes people forget the difference between a suggestion and a command. I also know the difference between being valued and being useful, and in that firm, I was both until a new partner decided he needed to prove something in public. His name was Graham Wexler, and he arrived like a storm in a tailored suit. Mid-40s, immaculate hair, a handshake that felt like it came with terms and conditions. He'd made his reputation at a bigger shop, the kind that put marble where you could have put carpet and called it culture. Halcyon Ridge hired him because we'd been seeking fresh energy, which is corporate language for we're nervous about our future and we want someone shiny to reassure us. Graham didn't understand my work, and worse, he didn't respect it. To him, relationship management was a support function, something you delegated to client service, while the real players hunted. He wanted me to be a hunter because to him everyone was either a hunter or prey, and he didn't believe a person could choose to be neither. I wasn't afraid of him, not exactly. I'd handled billionaires mid-tantrum and heirs with messiah complexes. But I'd learned to be wary of people who confuse attention with influence. They burn hot, and then they burn everything around them. The Gala was his idea. Every year, Halcyon Ridge hosted a private client event in the winter, a black-tie dinner disguised as thought leadership. We invited our best clients, a curated list of prospects, and a few local officials who liked to feel important. We'd bring in a keynote speaker, former central banker, well-known economist, retired general, someone with gravitas, and a speaking fee that made assistants blanch. The real purpose wasn't the speech. The real purpose was the seating chart. Graham wanted to overhaul it. He wanted mixing. He wanted synergy. He wanted Redwood's table to include new prospects because in his mind, you put a billionaire next to a millionaire and the millionaire becomes easier to close. He kept using the phrase social proof, which made me want to take a long walk into the nearest river. Redwood didn't like being used as social proof. Redwood liked being respected. I pushed back gently at first. They'll come if they feel it's their evening, I said. They won't come if they feel it's our pitch. Graham smiled like he'd heard a child announce a plan to become an astronaut. Marin, you're thinking small, he said. We're not pitching. We're curating. There's a difference. There is a difference, I thought, but it's not the one you think. In the weeks leading up to the gala, my life became a series of micro-negotiations. Redwood's assistant wanted to know the menu before they confirmed attendance. Redwood's daughter wanted to know who would be there because she didn't want to deal with anyone from the Harlow circle. Redwood's son wanted to bring a friend who was thinking about launching a fund, which meant he wanted to bring a man with a fragile ego and a complicated relationship with the truth. Meanwhile, Graham wanted to seat Redwood next to 3 prospects from out of town and 1 local business owner whose idea of sophistication was a new sports car. Redwood will not appreciate this, I told him 2 days before the event, in my office, with the door closed and my voice even. Graham leaned back in the chair like he owned it. Redwood needs to appreciate that this firm is evolving, he said. They don't run us. We run our strategy. I took a slow breath. They don't run us, I said, but they can leave us. He laughed. Not a warm laugh. A laugh that said, what a funny little fear. They won't, he said. They're comfortable. And frankly, Marin, I've heard the relationship is too dependent on you. That's a risk. That sentence landed in my body like a pebble dropped into still water, ripples spreading, warning after warning after warning. Too dependent on you. A risk. In that firm, being indispensable was celebrated until someone decided it was politically inconvenient. Then it became a threat. Redwood chose a dedicated manager for a reason, I said carefully. They value continuity. And we value scalability, he replied, still smiling. It'll be fine. Just mingle. Do what you do, but broaden the circle. Broaden the circle. Mingle. It was the language of people who think connection is a trick you perform rather than a trust you build. The night of the gala, the hotel ballroom glowed like a jewelry box. Crystal chandeliers, white orchids, linen so crisp it looked like it had been ironed by angels. String quartet at the edge of the room, playing something elegant and unobtrusive. Servers moved like choreography, black vests and white gloves, trays held steady, faces politely blank. At the entrance, our firm's logo was projected in soft light on the wall, as if we were a brand people should feel grateful to be near. I arrived early, as always. I walked the room, checked the place cards, confirmed the microphone worked, made sure the keynote speaker had water and a quiet space. I greeted clients as they arrived, offered warmth without fawning, remembered names and the details that make people feel seen, the daughter's new job, the son's recent surgery, the spouse's passion project. I did the work that doesn't look like work, the work that makes people relax enough to open up. Redwood arrived at 7:14. I remember because their timing was always deliberate, never rushed, never early enough to seem eager. The patriarch, Adrian Redwood, entered on the arm of his wife, Elise. Adrian was in his late 70s, tall and lean, with silver hair combed back and a posture that suggested he'd never once slouched in his life. He didn't use a cane even though I knew his knee bothered him. He wore pain like a private matter. Elise was a decade younger, elegant, with eyes that missed nothing. Their daughter, Cora, came in behind them and their son, Nathan, followed with that friend of his, the fun launcher, already scanning the room like it owed him applause. Adrian saw me and his face softened into something that looked, to anyone watching, like polite recognition. But I knew him well enough to read the micro-expression beneath it, relief. Familiarity. Safety. There you are, he said, and in the subtext was everything he didn't say, good. You're here. This will be handled. Mr. Redwood, I replied, and I met his gaze directly. Mrs. Redwood. Cora. Nathan. I nodded at the friend. Welcome. I'm glad you made it. Adrian's hand briefly touched my elbow, the kind of gesture that could look like nothing and feel like ownership if you didn't understand the difference. For him, it was a sign of trust. For anyone else, it would have been presumptuous. Who's at our table? Elise asked, her tone light but her eyes sharp. I already knew the answer and I already hated it. We have a couple of guests joining you this evening, I said, choosing words the way you choose footing on ice. Graham Wexler will be there, of course. And there are a few newer relationships he's eager for you to meet. Elise's smile didn't change, but the air around her did. Newer relationships, she repeated. How ambitious. Adrian didn't say anything. He just looked at me. I could almost hear the question. Did you allow this? I held his gaze. I'll be close, I said softly, because I couldn't say I tried to stop it without creating a scene. If you need anything at all, you signal me. His mouth tightened a fraction, then he nodded. Very well, he said. Let's enjoy the performance. As they moved toward the cocktail area, I felt Graham's presence before I saw him. He slid up beside me like we were friends. There they are, he said brightly, watching Redwood like a fisherman watching a trophy fish. Tonight's going to be a turning point. It will, I said, and I meant it in a way he didn't understand. The cocktail hour was a blur of hands and laughter and introductions. I did mingle. I made small talk. I smiled. I asked the right questions. I gave the right answers. I placed people together strategically, not for prospecting but for comfort, for ease. I kept an eye on Redwood's table assignment like it was a live wire. Dinner began on schedule. The ballroom lights dimmed to a warm glow. Guests found their seats, the soft chaos of chairs and dresses and murmured greetings settling into the hum of wealth at rest. I watched Redwood approach their table, and my stomach tightened. There it was, Graham at the head, Adrian and Elise to his right, Cora and Nathan across, and squeezed into the remaining seats were four people Redwood didn't know: a regional real estate magnate, his wife, a tech entrepreneur with 2 white teeth, and an older man who'd made his money in private equity and wore it like armor. Prospects. Targets. Synergy. Adrian sat without complaint. Elise sat with a smile that could freeze water. Cora leaned toward her mother and whispered something that made Elise's eyes narrow, just slightly. Nathan's friend looked thrilled, like he'd been invited to sit at the cool kids' table. I hovered on the edge of the room, close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to not make Redwood feel managed. That balance is everything. Too close, and you look like a handler. Too far, and you look absent. Graham stood to give a welcoming toast. He tapped the microphone gently, as if he was testing an instrument that belonged to him. His voice carried well, warm, and confident. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about navigating uncertainty, and partnership, and community. The words were polished, practiced. He made eye contact with the room like he was distributing charm. When he spoke about the strength of our relationships, his gaze landed on Adrian Redwood and lingered a beat too long, as if to say, "See? I've got him." I watched Adrian's face. He was listening the way powerful men listen when they've already made up their minds about you. After the keynote speaker, an economist who made inflation sound like a bedtime story, dessert arrived, a delicate thing with gold leaf and too much chocolate. The room relaxed into that late evening softness where people lean in closer and laugh a little louder. This was the mingling window, the moment Graham wanted, the moment he'd been building toward. I saw him stand and move around the room, glass in hand, touching shoulders, laughing. He looked like a man who believed he was winning. He stopped at Redwood's table and stayed there, leaning in, talking, performing. I watched Elise's smile remain fixed while her eyes grew colder. I watched Cora's patience fray. I watched Nathan's friend talk too much, trying to impress people who didn't care. And then, as if he couldn't resist a final flourish, Graham did the one thing you never do with someone like Redwood. He made it public. He lifted his glass and, with that practiced charm, said something about celebrating our amazing team. People turned toward him, ready for applause. I felt the room's attention shift like a tide. He gestured toward me across the room. "And I want to acknowledge Marin Caldwell," he said, voice bright. "Marin has been a long-standing part of our client service effort, and while we appreciate her dedication, we're also evolving how we engage. We need our people to be proactive, to be out there, building relationships, not just maintaining them." A few people chuckled politely. I didn't move. I didn't blink. My body went very still, the way it does when your brain is racing so fast it needs your muscles to stop. Graham continued, smiling wider. So, effective immediately, we're making a change in coverage. Marin will be transitioning off certain relationships, and we'll be bringing in fresh faces who can mingle more effectively with new prospects. He tipped his glass toward me, like this was a compliment. Marin, thank you for your service. Thank you for your service. Like I was being discharged from an army I didn't enlist in. There are humiliations that land with heat, that make your face burn and your throat tighten. This one landed cold. It was so calculated, so unnecessary, so public, that it separated me from my own shock. I could see it happening to me like I was watching a scene in someone else's life. I felt eyes on me. Curious. Sympathetic. Some delighted, because nothing makes wealthy people feel more alive than watching someone else fall down in expensive shoes. The servers kept moving, silent and trained. The quartet played on, unaware or pretending to be. I looked at Redwood's table. Adrian Redwood had stopped eating. His fork was resting on the plate, untouched. Elise's hand was still, fingers lightly curled around her wineglass. Cora's mouth had tightened into a line so sharp it could cut. Nathan's face had gone blank, which for him was rare. He was usually expressive, reactive. Even the prospects at the table looked uncertain, like they'd just realized they'd bought tickets to a show they didn't understand. Graham turned toward Redwood's table, still smiling. Adrian, he said, using the patriarch's first name without invitation, another small arrogance stacked onto the big one. We'll be assigning a new dedicated lead, of course, but you'll love the energy we're bringing in. We're scaling. Scaling. Like trust was a spreadsheet. Adrian didn't respond immediately. He lifted his gaze to Graham, and the room's temperature dropped another degree. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was assessment. A man measuring how much damage someone could do and deciding whether to stop it now or let it teach a lesson. Graham, oblivious, kept going. We can't have our team members hiding in corners, he said with a laugh that didn't quite land. We need them out in the mix. Right, Marin? He was looking at me, expecting me to smile and take the hit gracefully to make him look like a strong leader. That's what he wanted. A clean execution. I walked toward the table, not fast, not slow, just steady. My heels clicked softly on the floor. The sound felt louder than it should have. When I reached the edge of Redwood's table, I didn't look at Graham first. I looked at Adrian. I gave him the smallest nod, a silent question. Do you want this handled quietly or loudly? Adrian's eyes flicked, almost imperceptibly, toward Graham. Then back to me. A single blink slow. Permission. Graham leaned in, lowering his voice as if he was being kind. Marin, he said, no hard feelings. This is business. We need people who understand growth. I smiled at him then, a soft, professional smile that made him relax. People like Graham think the smile is surrender. They don't realize it can be camouflage. I leaned closer so my words would reach only him, and I spoke in the same calm tone I used when explaining market volatility to anxious heirs. Graham, I whispered, Redwood's assets are held in a structure with a key person provision. If their dedicated manager is changed without notice, they can withdraw immediately. For a fraction of a second, his smile stayed in place while his eyes shifted, the way a mask shifts when the face beneath it changes. Confusion first. Then calculation. Then a flash of annoyance, because the information didn't fit his narrative. He tried to recover. That's not really a concern, he murmured, still smiling, still trying to keep the public performance intact. These things they can do it on a phone, I said softly. Right here. His jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The truth doesn't beg to be believed. It simply waits for the moment it becomes unavoidable. Adrian Redwood set his napkin down with deliberate care. It was a small movement, but it carried authority, like a judge setting down a gavel. Elise's eyes were on Graham now, and there was no warmth left in them at all. Cora sat back slightly, as if giving the moment space to unfold. Nathan's hands clenched briefly, then relaxed, like he'd decided not to intervene because he wanted Graham to keep talking. Graham turned toward Adrian, still trying to salvage. Adrian, he said, voice louder now, for the table and the nearby guests to hear, I'm sure you understand leadership decisions. Marin's role is being optimized. You'll have even more resources. Adrian's voice, when it came, was quiet. Not weak. Quiet like a door closing. You fired her, he said. Graham chuckled awkwardly. We're restructuring. It's you fired her, Adrian repeated, and this time his eyes moved slightly, taking in the room, the people watching, the partners listening. At my table. Graham's face flushed a shade. It wasn't meant as disrespect. Adrian nodded once. Of course not, he said, and the words were polite, but the meaning was not. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. People at the table shifted. The prospects looked confused. Someone across the room fell quiet mid-laugh, sensing the shift in energy. The kind of silence that spreads, contagious. Graham leaned forward, voice tightening. Adrian, there's no need to, let's discuss this privately. Adrian unlocked his phone. His thumb moved with the confidence of someone who had done far more consequential things with less effort. He didn't look at Graham while he navigated the screen. He didn't need to. He knew Graham was watching. That was the point. Elise sat perfectly still, eyes on Graham like he was an insect pinned to a board. Cora's expression was serene now, which frightened me more than anger would have. Nathan's mouth twitched, almost a smile, but it wasn't amusement. It was satisfaction. The prospects at the table began to look like people who wished they could disappear into the tablecloth. Graham's voice dropped. Adrian, he said, and for the first time there was fear in it, raw under the polish. Please, let's not make a scene. Adrian looked up then, and his gaze met Graham's like a blade finding its mark. You already did, he said. His thumb tapped. Once. Twice. A few more movements, precise, practiced. He wasn't fumbling. He wasn't hesitating. That told me everything. This wasn't a bluff. Redwood had planned for the possibility of disruption because people with that much money plan for everything. They had designed their structures to protect them from instability, from turnover, from firms that thought they owned the relationship rather than served it. Graham's face went pale. He looked around, probably hoping someone would step in, another partner, someone senior. But no one moved. That's another thing about firms like Halcyon Ridge. When the top starts to wobble, everyone freezes, waiting to see where the power will land so they can stand on it. Adrian's phone made a small, almost inaudible sound, a confirmation. He set it down on the table as calmly as if he'd just sent a text about the weather. It's done, he said. Graham swallowed. What is? Adrian's voice remained quiet. We've withdrawn our assets. A gasp, soft but real, rippled from the nearest tables. Someone's fork clinked against a plate. Across the room, I saw one of our senior partners, a man who'd spent the last decade pretending he was too important to worry, go rigid, his face turning the color of paper. Graham forced a laugh that sounded like it hurt. That's not possible, he said, but the words were for himself, not for Adrian. It is, Adrian replied. It was designed to be. Graham's eyes flicked to me, accusation blazing now. You knew. You let me. He couldn't say it out loud without admitting he'd been warned. And he couldn't admit that without unraveling his authority in front of everyone he'd tried to impress. Adrian turned his gaze to me then, and the room seemed to narrow. Marin, he said, would you join us for a moment? I stepped closer, aware of the eyes, the tension, the invisible lines of loyalty and panic snapping into place. Adrian gestured to the chair beside him, the one Graham had been occupying like a throne. Graham hesitated, caught between humiliation and disbelief, then shifted back slightly, as if the chair had suddenly burned him. I didn't sit. Not yet. I held myself still, letting Adrian control the tempo. He liked that. Power respects restraint. I don't like surprises, Adrian said, not unkindly. I tried to prevent this, I replied softly, because I wouldn't lie to him and I wouldn't throw gasoline on the fire by explaining in detail. I wasn't given the authority. Elise's gaze softened a fraction. Cora's eyes stayed sharp. Adrian nodded slowly, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. They thought they could replace you, he said. Graham found his voice again, strained. Adrian, with respect, no relationship should be dependent on one person. Adrian looked at him the way you look at someone who's trying to teach you your own language. You misunderstand, he said. The relationship is not dependent on her. It is dependent on trust. She has it. You don't. Graham's mouth opened, closed. He looked like a man trying to calculate in his head and realizing he no longer understood the numbers. Adrian turned back to me. You'll speak with us tomorrow, he said. Not as an employee of this firm. As yourself. My heartbeat kicked once hard. Mr. Redwood, Marin, he corrected gently, and that shift, first name, was like a door opening. You've managed our affairs with discretion. You've protected us from other people's ambition. We don't forget that. Across the room, the senior partners had begun to move, finally, converging like anxious birds. I could see Graham's allies and enemies both waking up, their faces tight with calculation. Halcyon Ridge had been built like a cathedral on Redwood's money, and cathedrals crack loudly when the foundation shifts. Graham leaned in, voice urgent now. Adrian, please. We can fix this. Marin can stay. Adrian raised one hand, and Graham stopped like he'd hit a wall. No, Adrian said, and there was finality in it. You made your decision. I've made mine. He stood then, the room watching, the silence holding. Elise rose with him, graceful. Cora stood, her chair whispering against the floor. Nathan followed, and even Nathan's friend, now pale, stumbled to his feet, realizing too late that he'd been sitting at the table where a public execution had taken place. Adrian looked down at Graham one last time. When you handle other people's lives, he said quietly, you should remember you're never the only one who can pull a lever. Then he turned to me. Walk us out, he said. And I did. We moved through the ballroom like a small procession, and people parted instinctively, not because we demanded it, but because they could feel the gravity. I kept my posture steady, my expression calm, even as my mind raced. Behind us, I heard murmurs begin, the hush of panic spreading through the firm's leadership like wildfire. At the entrance, Adrian paused. He looked at me, and for the first time that night, I saw something like tenderness in his eyes, not sentimental, not soft, but human. You were embarrassed, he said, statement not question. Yes, I admitted. He nodded, as if acknowledging a fact on a ledger. Good, he said. You should remember how it feels. It will keep you honest when you have more power than you expect. Elise touched my hand briefly, her fingers cool. Tomorrow, she said. We'll talk. No intermediaries. Cora looked at me, her gaze direct. You did your job, she said, and there was something fierce in it, like she was speaking not just to me but to every person in the room who'd watched and said nothing. Nathan exhaled, as if releasing tension. I always hated that place, he muttered, more to himself than anyone. Then he looked at me. You're not going back, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't answer because I couldn't yet. I'd been fired in public, yes. But I'd also just watched a billionaire withdraw everything on a phone at a gala, and I knew this story was no longer about losing my job. It was about what happens when you mistake someone's quiet competence for weakness. We stepped into the cold night air, the city lights sharp against the dark. The valet brought the car quickly, because even valets understand power. Adrian and Elise climbed in. Cora and Nathan followed. Before the door closed, Adrian looked at me one last time. Sleep, he said simply, as if he could command that too. Tomorrow, you'll decide what you want. The car pulled away, taillights fading, leaving me under the hotel awning with my coat still on and my life rearranging itself around me. Behind the glass doors, I could see the ballroom, the shimmering lights, the movement of people, the distant figure of Graham Wexler standing frozen at Redwood's table like a man who'd just watched the ground disappear under his feet. I could almost feel the firm's panic beginning to take shape. Emergency meetings, frantic calls, partners trying to assign blame, assistants being asked to find numbers they didn't have. The machine would lurch and sputter and then, very possibly, begin to eat itself. I stood there for a moment longer, breathing in cold air, and I made myself a promise. If I was going to be pulled into a new world, I would step in with my eyes open. Power was being offered to me, not in the form of a title or a glossy business card, but in the form of choice. And choice, I'd learned, is the rarest asset of all. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, the way you do when your body has been running a marathon while you sleep. My phone was face down on the nightstand because I didn't trust myself not to look. In my apartment, the winter light came in thin and gray, and for a moment I lay still, listening to the quiet like it might tell me what kind of day this was going to be. Then I flipped the phone over. 26 missed calls. 31 emails. A dozen texts, some from colleagues who hadn't spoken to me in months, suddenly warm and concerned, like they'd always been on my side. 2 from senior partners. 1 from Graham Wexler. And 3 from a number I didn't recognize but immediately knew belonged to someone in Redwood's orbit because the timestamps were precise: 8:02, 8:17, 8:31. Nothing frantic. Just persistent. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't open Graham's message. I didn't open the partner's emails. I went straight to the unknown number and dialed back. It rang once. Marin Caldwell, a calm female voice answered. "Good morning." "Good morning," I said, and my own voice sounded steadier than I felt. "This is Marin." "This is Sloan," she replied. "Mr. Redwood's executive office." "Thank you for returning the call promptly." Of course it was. In families like Redwood, even assistants sounded like diplomats. "Of course," I said. "How can I help?" "Mr. and Mrs. Redwood would like to see you at 10 o'clock, Sloan said. Their townhouse. The driver will collect you at 9:40. Will that work?" There was no question in her tone. It wasn't coercive. It was simply the assumption of a world where schedules bend around certain people. "Yes," I said. "That works." "Excellent," Sloan replied. "Please be prepared to speak candidly. Mr. Redwood does not appreciate corporate phrasing." A small smile tugged at my mouth despite myself. "Neither do I said. Sloan paused, the tiniest beat of approval. "Good," she said. "You'll find this conversation efficient. We'll see you soon." The call ended. I sat there for a moment, phone in hand, staring at the screen as if it might change. Then I set it down and finally opened the email from Halcyon Ridge's managing partner. Subject: urgent. Please call me immediately. The body was short, and the brevity was its own kind of panic. "Marin, we need to speak as soon as possible. Please call me." Drew no apology. No acknowledgement. No mention of the humiliation. Just need, like I was a tool he'd misplaced. The second email was from the head of HR, which made me laugh out loud in the empty room. HR only becomes urgent when the firm fears consequences. Subject: follow-up/clarification. Marin, following last night's event, we'd like to clarify that any comments made publicly do not reflect the firm's formal processes. Please contact me at your earliest convenience. Warm regards, Lydia. Warm regards. In the wake of an execution. I opened Graham's text last because I wanted to see if he had the decency to feel shame. "Marin, we should talk. Last night escalated unnecessarily. I'm prepared to make things right. Call me." Escalated unnecessarily. Like it was a weather event. Like the billionaire client had spontaneously decided to detonate at the gala for sport. I didn't call him. I showered slowly, letting the hot water loosen the knot between my shoulders. I chose an outfit with care, not a business meeting outfit, not a job interview outfit. Something that said I belonged wherever I stood. Dark trousers, silk blouse, will coat that fit perfectly. Minimal jewelry. Hair smooth. Shoes comfortable enough to walk in, sharp enough to signal confidence. There's a language in clothing in that world, and I'd been fluent for years. At 9:40, as promised, a black sedan pulled up in front of my building. The driver stepped out, tall and expressionless, in a dark suit. "Ms. Caldwell?" he asked. "Yes." He opened the rear door, and I slid into a warm leather interior that smelled faintly of cedar and money. As we moved through the city, I watched the streets like I was watching a film of someone else's life. People hurried, hands in pockets against the cold, carrying coffee and briefcases and their own small dramas. None of them knew that a firm might be dying today because of a whisper at a gala. My phone vibrated again. Another call from Halcyon Ridge. I didn't answer. The Redwood townhouse was in a part of the city where the buildings didn't advertise their wealth, they simply existed in it. Stone facade, iron railings, discreet security that you only noticed if you knew how to look. The driver pulled up and a man I'd never seen before opened the door before I could knock, as if he'd been watching my approach through a camera. "Miss Caldwell," he said with a slight nod. "This way." Inside, the townhouse was quiet in the way rich homes are quiet: thick rugs, heavy drapes, sound absorbed by expensive surfaces. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and something citrus. The man led me through a hallway lined with art that wasn't there to be pretty, it was there to be valuable. We entered a library that looked like it belonged in a movie: floor-to-ceiling shelves, a fireplace with a low flame, leather chairs arranged in a conversational triangle. Adrian Redwood stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the street like he was watching a chessboard. Elise sat in a chair near the fire, a cup of tea in hand. Cora stood by a side table, flipping through a thin folder. Nathan leaned against a bookshelf, arms crossed, wearing a sweater instead of a suit, like he was making a point about not needing to perform. Adrian turned when I entered. "Marin," he said, and that single word steadied me. "Mr. Redwood," I said. "Mrs. Redwood." "Cora." "Nathan." "Sit," Adrian said, gesturing to the chair across from Elise. Again, not a request. I sat. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence wasn't awkward, it was deliberate. In that pause, they were taking me in, reading me the way I read clients. How shaken was I? How angry? How hungry? How honest? Adrian finally spoke. "Tell us," he said. "Exactly what happened." I didn't embellish. I didn't dramatize. I told them what Graham had been doing since he arrived: the push toward mixing, the pressure to use Redwood as a magnet for prospects. I explained the seating change. I explained the warning I'd tried to give. I explained the Gala moment, his public "thank you for your service," the immediate termination framed as a lesson. I kept my voice steady, factual. But I didn't hide the truth of it either. "It was meant to humiliate," I said finally. "And to prove he could." Elise's eyes narrowed. "To prove he could," she repeated softly, as if tasting the arrogance. At our table, Cora shut the folder with a crisp snap. "He used us," she said, "as stage dressing." Nathan exhaled through his nose. "He's a moron," he muttered. Adrian lifted one hand slightly, not to silence Nathan, but to slow the room. Then he looked at me again. "And you," he said. "What did you do?" I held his gaze. "I told him the truth," I said. "That your structure allowed you to withdraw immediately if the dedicated manager was changed without notice." Adrian's mouth tightened slightly. "And why did you tell him that?" "Because you asked me to," I could have said. "Because you gave permission." But I knew that wasn't what he meant. He meant something deeper. I took a breath. "Because it was the only thing that would stop him from thinking this was just internal politics," I said. "And because I would rather you leave loudly than stay quietly while someone else plays games with your money." Adrian stared at me for a long beat. Then he nodded once. "Good," he said. Elise sipped her tea like she had all day to drink it. "Do you understand what you did?" she asked me. "I understand the immediate consequence," I replied. "Halcyon Ridge is in crisis." Cora's smile was sharp. "Crisis is a gentle word." Adrian walked toward the desk and picked up a tablet that was lying there. He tapped the screen and turned it toward me. It showed a series of accounts and transfers, lines of numbers that made my brain automatically categorize: liquidity, timing, settlement, tax implications. "We didn't just withdraw," he said. "We moved everything." "You moved everything last night?" I asked, and I couldn't keep the edge of disbelief out of my voice. He looked mildly amused. "Marin," he said, "we don't do anything without preparation. The trigger existed. The paths existed. We simply chose to press the button." I nodded slowly. Of course. Of course they had contingency paths. Of course they had a parallel structure. People who survive for generations don't put their wealth in a single basket and hope the basket behaves. "And now," Adrian continued, "Halcyon Ridge is calling. Emailing. Begging." "They will," I said. Nathan shifted. "They called me," he said. "Like I'm going to talk my father into forgiving their idiot partner." Elise set her cup down with the softest clink. "We don't forgive humiliation," she said, as if stating a family motto. Adrian's eyes stayed on me. "The question," he said, "is what we do with you." The room tightened around the words. I kept my posture calm. That's your decision, I said. No, Adrian replied. It's yours. We're offering. You're choosing. Cora stepped forward slightly. We want you, she said, direct and unapologetic. Not because you're convenient. Because you know us. You know our messes. You know how to keep our name out of headlines and our money out of other people's hands. Nathan nodded. You're the only person I've met in that industry who doesn't get weird around us, he said. Everyone else either worships or resents. Elise's gaze softened a fraction. You've been steady, she said. Steady is rare. Adrian moved back to the window, looking out again, as if he preferred not to watch the offer land on my face. We want you to run our private office, he said. Not as an advisor from a firm. As our own. My throat tightened. Not with emotion, though there was some, but with the weight of what that meant. A private family office role was power wrapped in invisibility. It was access without the noise. It was responsibility that could swallow your life if you let it. It was also, undeniably, the kind of position that made other firms treat you like a kingmaker. I'm listening, I said carefully. Adrian turned. Compensation, he said, like he was checking an item off a list. Triple what you were paid. Plus performance incentives aligned with preservation, not growth for growth's sake. You will have staff. You will have authority. You will have autonomy. Triple. My brain did the math automatically, then did it again, because numbers like that still felt surreal even after years around wealth. Halcyon Ridge had paid me well, but they'd paid me like an employee. Redwood was talking about paying me like a pillar. And boundaries? I asked, because that was what mattered more than money. Elise's lips curved slightly. Smart, she said. I won't be on call for chaos 24 hours a day, I said, and I heard my own firmness like a new voice. I can be responsive, but there must be a system. I won't be asked to do personal errands disguised as family needs. And I won't be asked to compromise ethics to protect reputations. Adrian studied me. You never have, he said. That's why we're here. Cora opened the folder she'd been holding and slid a single page toward me across the table. It was not a contract. It was a term sheet. Clean, direct, like a promise that could become a weapon if needed. I glanced at it, but I didn't touch it yet. You understand, Adrian said. If you accept, Halcyon Ridge will become your enemy. I let that sink in. The firm would be furious, not just because they'd lost Redwood, but because Redwood's departure would be blamed on a single mistake that everyone could see. They would want someone to punish. And if Redwood hired me, the story would become unbearable. The woman they fired became the person who took the billionaire with her. They already fired me, I said. They made me their enemy first. Nathan's mouth twitched again. Honestly, he said, they deserve it. Elise's eyes sharpened. We do not act out of spite, she said, though the room knew that was only partly true. We act out of principle. There is a difference. Adrian nodded. And the principle is simple, he said. We do not tolerate instability imposed by ego. I finally picked up the term sheet. My fingers didn't shake. That surprised me. Maybe shock had burned off overnight. Maybe I'd already crossed the bridge. As I scanned the page, my phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Answer it, Adrian said suddenly. I looked up. Excuse me. Answer it, he repeated. Let's hear how they speak when they're afraid. Cora's eyes lit with something like anticipation. Nathan straightened, suddenly interested. Elise's expression remained composed, but there was a spark in it too, the cold pleasure of watching consequences. My instincts screamed caution. Never take a call like that in front of clients. Never let other people turn your career into theater. But this wasn't a normal client relationship anymore. And Adrian Redwood was offering me a lesson. Power doesn't hide from discomfort. It uses it. I pulled out my phone and looked. Drew Halston. Managing partner. I hit accept. Drew, I said. Marin, his voice burst through, too loud, too eager. Thank God. Where are you? I'm unavailable, I said calmly. What do you need? A pause. He recalibrated. Last night was unfortunate, he said. Graham acted without proper authorization. That's not how we handle, Drew. I cut in gently. I was terminated publicly. At a client gala. Yes, yes, and that was he stopped, then tried again. We'd like you to come in today. We can fix this. We can put you back in your role. We can address Redwood immediately. I could almost picture him pacing, tie loosened, eyes on a spreadsheet showing catastrophe. I'm not coming in, I said. Another pause, longer. Then his voice changed. Marin, he said, softer, trying empathy. Look, we value you. This firm values you. Graham got carried away. He's new. He's a partner, I said. He isn't new to power. Drew exhaled sharply. Fine, he said, dropping the softness. What do you want? There it was. The transactional heart. I glanced at Adrian, who watched me with mild interest. Elise's gaze was steady. Cora looked like she wanted to take the phone and speak herself. Nathan looked amused. What do I want? I repeated, giving myself a beat. I want accountability. We'll handle Graham, Drew said quickly. We can remove him from client-facing. You can't remove what he represents, I replied. You promoted that culture the moment you hired him. Drew's voice hardened. Marin, don't do this. You know what's at stake. Yes, I said. I do. And then I decided to stop playing defense. Drew, I said, Redwood has already withdrawn. Silence. It wasn't the silence of a dropped call. It was the silence of a mind trying to reject reality. What? Drew said finally, voice thin. They withdrew last night, I said. At the table. I watched Adrian's expression as I said it, no change, no satisfaction, just confirmation. Elise's mouth tightened slightly, approval. Cora's eyes gleamed. Nathan almost laughed, but held it back. Drew's breathing sounded louder. That's Marin, that's impossible. Settlement, custody, it was designed to be possible, I said, echoing Adrian's words. You should check your accounts. Another pause, and then I heard a faint sound in the background, someone speaking urgently to Drew, muffled. Papers. The frantic rhythm of crisis. Marin, Drew said, and now his voice was raw. You can stop this. I nearly smiled. I can't, I said. You already started it. Come in, he pleaded. Please. If you come in, if we can show Redwood stability. You showed them instability in public, I said. Stability isn't a speech. It's behavior. Drew swallowed. Did you tell them to withdraw? No, I said. I told Graham the truth. Redwood made their own choice. Drew's voice dropped to a hiss. Where are you? I looked at Adrian. He gave me the smallest nod, as if to say, don't. I'm safe, I said. And I'm done. Drew's tone snapped. If you walk away, Marin, you're burning a bridge. I laughed softly, because it was either that or scream. Drew, I said, you set the bridge on fire last night, and then asked me to carry water. Silence again, but this time it was different. This time it was the silence of someone realizing they've lost control. Finally, Drew spoke, very quietly. Graham will be removed, he said. We can make that happen today. Name your terms. Terms. Like my dignity was negotiable. I don't have terms, I said. I have a decision. And what decision is that? Drew asked, voice strained. I met Elise's gaze, then Cora's, then Nathan's, and finally Adrian's. Adrian looked back at me, calm as stone. I'm resigning, I said into the phone. Drew made a sound like pain. Marin, effective immediately, I added. Please have HR send confirmation of my separation and final compensation in writing. And Drew. What? Tell Graham, I said softly, that mingling is easy. Trust isn't. I ended the call before he could respond. For a moment, the room was silent again. But this silence felt clean. Cora let out a breath she'd been holding. Well, she said, that was satisfying. Elise gave her a look. Cora. What? Cora replied, unapologetic. It was. Nathan chuckled, unable to help himself. I'm going to frame his face, he said. I wish I'd taken a picture. Adrian's mouth twitched slightly, not a smile, but the hint of one. We don't gloat, he said, though his eyes said, but we do learn. Then he turned to me. Are you clear? He asked. Yes, I said, and I was surprised by how true it felt. I'm clear. Good, he said. Then we proceed. He crossed to the desk and pressed a button. A panel in the wall opened silently, and Sloane entered with a tablet and a folder, moving like a person who knew exactly where she belonged in every room. "Miss Caldwell," Sloane said, and there was a new respect in her tone already, as if the hierarchy had shifted in the last 5 minutes. Adrian gestured. "We'll formalize," he said. "But before we do, Marin will outline what she needs to do her job." Sloane's gaze flicked to me. "Of course," she said, ready to take notes. I took another breath, grounding myself. This was the moment where fantasy became structure. "I need access," I began. "Full visibility into the family's entities, trusts, investment vehicles, philanthropic arms. I need the current list of advisors and service providers, with contracts and key clauses. I need authority to hire and fire within the office. I need a reporting cadence. Weekly check-ins with the executive office, monthly investment review with Mr. and Mrs. Redwood, quarterly family governance meeting including Cora and Nathan." Elise nodded slightly, approving the precision. "I need an emergency protocol," I continued. "Not call Marin for everything. A tier system. I'm not a concierge. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a magician. I can be a stabilizer, but only if chaos has somewhere else to go first." Nathan raised his eyebrows. Finally, he muttered. Cora watched me closely, measuring. Elise's eyes were thoughtful. "And," I added, "I need clarity on your values. What matters most? Preservation, growth, discretion, impact ranked. Because if we hit a crisis, I will choose based on that ranking." Adrian held my gaze. "Discretion," he said first. "Then preservation. Then impact." Elise added, "Family cohesion," she said. "Above impact if impact threatens it." Cora didn't flinch. "Agreed," she said. Nathan shrugged. "Yeah," he said. "Fine." I nodded. "Then that's our compass," I said. "And I need one more thing." Adrian lifted an eyebrow. "Name it." "I need the ability to say no to you," I said calmly. "To any of you. Without punishment. Because if I can't say no, I'm not protecting you. I'm enabling you." The room went very still again. Elise's eyes sharpened. Cora's mouth tightened. Nathan looked intrigued. Adrian stared at me for a long moment, and in that moment I felt the edge of risk. This could be the sentence that cost me everything. Wealthy families like yes people. They don't always like mirrors. Then Adrian nodded once. "Good," he said again. "That's why you're here." Elise's mouth curved slightly. "If you can say no," she said, "you can be trusted when you say yes." Cora exhaled, accepting. Nathan looked almost impressed. Sloane typed rapidly, expression neutral, but hands moving with speed. Adrian gestured toward the term sheet still in my hand. "Sign the agreement," he said, "and the office becomes yours." I looked down at the paper again. Triple compensation. Authority. Autonomy. And the silent price. The weight of being the person who holds the threads together. My hand moved to the pen Sloane offered. I signed my name, Marin Caldwell. As the ink dried, something in my chest loosened. Not relief exactly. More like alignment. A sense that the ground under me had shifted and, for the first time in a long time, it was solid. Sloane collected the page and slid it into the folder. "Congratulations," she said, and it wasn't warm, but it was real. Adrian turned back to the window once more, the meeting apparently done. "Now," he said, "we handle the aftermath." "The firm?" I asked. "The firm will handle itself," Elise said, voice smooth. "It will panic. It will blame. It will fracture." Cora's eyes glittered. "And it will be hunted," she added. "Because once Redwood leaves, everyone else will ask why." Nathan uncrossed his arms. "So what happens?" he asked. I answered before anyone else could, because I understood the ecosystem. "Competitors will circle," I said. "Partners will defect. Regulators might sniff around if there's a rumor of mishandling. And most importantly, every other client will realize Halcyon Ridge isn't stable." Elise nodded, satisfied. Adrian's face remained unreadable. "And Graham?" Nathan asked. Adrian's gaze stayed on the street. "Graham will learn," he said quietly. "Or he will be removed from environments where learning is optional." Cora smirked. "That's one way to put it." I stood slowly, feeling the room settle into a new shape around me. I should go, I said. There are calls I need to make. Custodians, attorneys, vendors. We need to ensure the transition is seamless. Quiet. Adrian turned, and for the first time his expression softened into something close to respect. Do it, he said. And Marin? Yes. You will be blamed, he said. By them. By others. They will say you engineered this. I didn't, I replied. I know, he said. But truth is not what people defend. People defend stories. Elise rose. Let them tell their story, she said. We will tell ours through outcomes. Cora stepped closer to me, her voice lower. Welcome, she said simply, and there was a sincerity in it that surprised me. Nathan gave a small nod. Don't disappear on us, he said. You're useful. I laughed softly. I'll take that as affection, I replied. Sloane walked me out, her steps quiet on the rugs. At the door, she paused. Your phone will continue, she said, not unkindly. Ignore it. I'll handle inbound for you once your access is configured. Thank you, I said. Outside, the cold air hit my face like a reset. The sedan was waiting. As I slid into the car, my phone buzzed again. Another call from Halcyon Ridge, another email, another desperate attempt to stitch back together what they'd ripped. I didn't answer. I looked out the window as we pulled away, and I watched the city move by in clean winter light. A small part of me still felt the sting of last night's humiliation, the eyes on me, the public dismissal, the cheap thrill Graham had taken in making me small. But that sting was fading, replaced by something steadier. They fired me at a gala because I didn't mingle enough. Now I was running a private office worth billions because I knew how to protect what mattered. And somewhere behind those ballroom doors, Halcyon Ridge was realizing that their anchor client wasn't just gone. Their gravity was gone. By the time the car dropped me back at my building, my phone had stopped feeling like a device and started feeling like a living thing, vibrating with hunger. I didn't check it in the lobby. I didn't check it in the elevator. I didn't check it when I stepped into my apartment, and the familiar smell of my own coffee beans and laundry detergent reminded me that, technically, I still had a normal life. I put the phone on the kitchen counter, face down again, like the screen itself could infect me. Then I did what I've always done when chaos tries to claim me. I built a list. Pen, paper, clean columns. The first column was immediate, the second was within 48 hours, the third was quietly never forget. Immediate, confirm custody and settlement status, confirm Redwood instructions are executed, lock down communications, establish perimeter, prevent leaks. Within 48 hours, transition service providers, secure data, hire interim staff, set governance meetings, stabilize family expectations. Quietly never forget, Halcyon Ridge will try to rewrite the story. Graham will try to make me the villain. Drew will try to make me the solution again. Someone will try to buy something with flattery. I turned the phone over and opened Sloane's first message, a secure link and a single sentence. Inbound is being routed. Use this channel for all communications. That was Redwood in one line, no drama, just structure. I clicked. It opened a secure comms portal, and suddenly my world narrowed into what mattered. Accounts, custodians, attorneys, controls. Everything else could scream into the void. The first call I made through the secure line was to Redwood's outside counsel, a woman named Priya Desai who spoke like she had never wasted a syllable in her life. Marin, she said, as if we'd been working together for years instead of minutes. We've been briefed. Good, I replied. I want confirmation of executed instructions, and I want a written summary of exposure. Halcyon Ridge will claim breach, inducement, interference. I want them discouraged. Priya's voice didn't change. They can claim whatever they like. The documents are clean. The trigger was in place. Withdrawal was contractually permitted. Your involvement is not material. Make sure it stays that way, I said. It will, she answered. Also, you should assume the firm will attempt to contact you through back channels. They already are, I said. Then let them, she replied. Every attempt is a record. After I hung up, I finally opened Drew's follow-up email. It wasn't begging anymore, it was bargaining. Marin, We are prepared to offer you a revised title and compensation package to return. We can also put in writing that your role is protected from unilateral changes. Please respond. I read it once, then a second time, not because it moved me, but because it confirmed what I needed to know. They were scrambling to make me a patch for a ship that had already taken on water. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted one sentence and sent it to HR, copying Priya. Please confirm in writing my termination effective date, final compensation, and that I am released from all non-compete obligations as your action was involuntary and public. No warmth. No rage. Just a paper trail. Then, because I'm not reckless, I did what every grown woman who's been burned in public learns to do. I called my own attorney. His name was Victor Rains, and he answered on the second ring like he'd been expecting me. I saw the rumor, he said. It's not a rumor, I replied. A pause. Where are you right now, he asked. In my kitchen, I said. I'm fine. Good, he replied. Don't speak to the firm without me. Don't let them lure you into a meeting. They'll try to get you on record. They'll try to make you sign something. They'll try to wrap your throat in velvet. I'm not meeting them, I said. Good, he repeated, and I noticed how Redwood people said good when something aligned with principle. It's a strange thing, the way power has its own vocabulary. Also, Victor continued, if Redwood is hiring you directly, the optics are combustible. They're aware, I said. Optics don't care who's aware, he replied. Optics only care who's hungry. That was the right word. Hungry. Halcyon Ridge would be hungry now. I spent the rest of that day doing the kind of work that never makes headlines, tightening, confirming, routing, securing. Sloan arranged temporary access, and by late afternoon I had a working view of the Redwood ecosystem. The sheer breadth of it was almost beautiful in its complexity, trusts layered like geological strata, entities for real estate, entities for operating businesses, entities for art holdings, entities for philanthropy. It wasn't hoarding. It was architecture. At 6:12 p.m., an alert came through the secure portal. Halcyon Ridge had attempted to contact Redwood's custodian directly. Priya responded within minutes with a letter that might as well have been a slap, polite and irreversible. I didn't need to see the whole thing to know what it said. Do not. At 7:30, Sloan sent another message. Mr. Redwood will take one call. You will be on it. 8 p.m. Be prepared. I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of water, not wine, because clarity matters more than comfort. When the secure line rang at 8 o'clock, I answered on the first ring. Marin, Adrian said. Mr. Redwood, I replied. Drew's voice came through next, strained and too careful. Adrian. Elise. Thank you for taking the call. Elise didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence was a presence all on its own. Adrian's voice was calm. You have 5 minutes, he said. Drew cleared his throat. We recognized last night was mishandled. Graham acted outside of intended, Adrian cut in. Did he asked softly. Drew hesitated. That single hesitation told me everything. Graham hadn't acted outside the culture. He'd acted as the culture. We are taking corrective action, Drew said quickly. We can assure you Marin's position is secure. We can offer concessions. Fee reductions. Dedicated resources. Adrian's response was simple. You fired her, he said. Drew's voice rose slightly. It was not you fired her, Adrian repeated, and I heard the faintest edge now, not anger, but disgust. In public. Drew tried to pivot. We've already initiated steps to remove Graham from Elise, Adrian said, and I realized he'd been waiting. Elise spoke then, voice smooth as ice. You think this is about Graham, she said. Drew stammered. He's the no, Elise replied. He is merely the one who said out loud what you have been thinking quietly. That our family is an asset to be leveraged. That continuity is optional. That humiliation is a tool. Silence. Drew tried again, smaller. We value your relationship. Adrian answered. If you valued it, he said, you would have protected it from ego. Drew's voice was tight. What would it take to repair this? Adrian didn't glance at me, but I felt his awareness like a hand at my back. He was giving me room. I spoke, because I knew the language Drew would understand. Drew, I said, you don't repair this. You learn from it. Drew's breath caught. Marin, no, I said, and the single syllable felt like a door closing. You made me a spectacle to impress a room. There is no version of this where I return and pretend it didn't happen. Drew's voice sharpened. You're making a mistake. I almost laughed again. I'm making a decision, I replied. Adrian's tone stayed even. We are done, he said. Do not contact us again except through counsel. Drew's voice broke, just slightly, a crack in the veneer. Adrian, please, this will damage the firm. Adrian's answer was the cleanest thing I've ever heard. Then the firm was fragile, he said. The line went dead. I sat still for a moment, listening to the quiet after the call, the kind of quiet that comes after a thunderclap. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't racing. The decision had landed fully now. Sloan sent a message seconds later. Well handled. I stared at those two words, and something in me loosened again, a thread of tension I hadn't realized was still there. Because being well handled isn't a compliment in Redwood world. It's a confirmation that you're safe to trust. The next morning, the story began to leak. Not the truth, of course. Never the truth. The story. There were whispers first, private texts among clients, hushed conversations at other firms, assistants calling assistants. Then the business newsletters started circling, vague and hungry. Major family office shifts assets after public dispute at Gala. Anchor client exits boutique wealth firm amid leadership shakeup. They didn't use names. They didn't need to. Everyone in that world can smell blood even when it's concealed under perfume. Halsey and Ridge went into full narrative control mode, which means they lied politely and asked everyone to repeat it. They told other clients the Redwood withdrawal was a planned diversification. They told prospects it was a custodial optimization. They told their own employees it was a temporary transition. They told the board it was containable. But money has a way of exposing truth. By Friday, 2 more large clients had called for meetings. Not because they were leaving yet, but because they were no longer sure they were safe staying. That's how collapse starts in financial firms, not with one client leaving, but with everyone suddenly asking questions. Questions require answers. Answers reveal weakness. Weakness invites predators. Graham Wexler tried to save himself by doing what men like Graham always do. He tried to make me the villain. He leaked a version of the story that painted me as disgruntled, insubordinate, emotionally reactive. He implied I'd incited the Redwood patriarch. He floated the idea that I'd violated internal policies by discussing account structure at the table. He told anyone who would listen that I'd been too close to the client, as if closeness was inherently unethical rather than the entire job. He underestimated one thing: wealthy people love gossip, but they love competence more. And everyone who mattered knew the difference between a woman who manages risk and a man who manufactures it. Within a week, Drew placed Graham on leave. A week after that, Graham resigned. The resignation was described as mutual. It was not. I heard through a quiet channel that Graham tried to land at another shop and discovered that the story had traveled ahead of him. He was radioactive. Not because he'd lost a client, people lose clients all the time, but because he'd embarrassed the wrong people publicly. In that world, embarrassment is a debt that compounds. Halsey and Ridge's real problem wasn't Graham, though. Their real problem was that Redwood had been their proof. Without Redwood, their pitch sounded like an echo. By the end of the month, their revenue projections were bleeding. Their partners began to argue in meetings that used to be rehearsed performances of unity. Risk committees demanded documentation. Compliance started asking questions about process deviations. HR pretended to care about my termination procedure because it was easier than admitting the firm's leadership had become reckless. Then the poachers arrived. Every firm in the region smelled an acquisition opportunity. Not a merger. A salvage operation. Halsey and Ridge had a few good advisors, a book of smaller clients that could be migrated, and a brand that still sounded respectable to people who didn't know what had happened. Firms love buying that kind of carcass. They get the assets, they cut the costs, they keep the marketing veneer, and they quietly bury the shame. It took 6 weeks for the acquisition rumors to become acquisition meetings. It took 10 weeks for the deal to be signed. And when I finally saw the headline again, vague, careful, Sanitized, I felt something I didn't expect. Not glee. Not revenge. Relief. Because nothing is more dangerous than a firm that believes its own mythology. Halcyon Ridge had been living on Redwood's money and calling it excellence. Losing Redwood wasn't just punishment. It was exposure. It forced truth into the open. On the day the acquisition was announced, I was not at a gala. I was in Redwood's conference room, a smaller, warmer space that looked out over a courtyard garden. The family office had already started to take shape around me. 2 analysts hired from firms that had tried to recruit me in the past, a controller who spoke in clean numbers, an operations manager who understood security and discretion. We weren't flashy. We were solid. Sloan walked in with a printout, set it beside me, and said, "It's official." I looked at the page. Halcyon Ridge Wealth acquired by Northgate Private Capital in strategic expansion. Strategic expansion. That's what you call it when you pick through the bones. Do you want this archived? Sloan asked, voice neutral. Yes, I said. File it. She paused. Are you satisfied? She asked, and the question was surprising enough that I looked up. Sloan's expression didn't change, but her eyes were curious. She had watched the whole thing unfold from Redwood's inner perimeter. She had seen me fall in public and then step into something larger. People like Sloan don't waste curiosity on small stories. I considered the question. Satisfied? What I felt was quieter than that. I'm at peace, I said. She nodded, as if that was the right answer. That afternoon, Adrian requested a meeting. Not an update. A meeting. When he asked, you came. He sat at the head of the table with Elise beside him, Cora across, Nathan leaning back in his chair like he was trying not to look impressed by how well things were running. Adrian looked at me. We have reviewed your first quarter plan, he said. I waited. With men like Adrian, you don't fill silence. You let it work. Elise spoke. You've been firm, she said. I have, I replied. Cora's mouth curved. Good, she said. We needed firm. Nathan exhaled. The old people we hired used to say yes to everything, he said. It was exhausting. Adrian's gaze sharpened slightly. You've told us no, he said. Yes, I replied. And you're still alive. A tiny hint of amusement moved across Elise's face. Cora smiled outright. Nathan laughed. Adrian held up a hand, not to stop the laughter, but to return to the point. You've improved our structure, he said. You've reduced our exposure. You've stabilized governance. And you have made our day-to-day quieter. That was the goal, I said. Adrian nodded. Then he said, we will increase your authority. I didn't react. I let him finish. You will have final sign-off on all external advisors, he continued. No one will be hired to serve this family without your approval. Understood, I said. Elise added, and we would like you to take over the foundation's operational oversight. Impact, yes, but with our values intact. I'll do that, I replied. Cora leaned forward. And, she said, we want a contingency plan. I blinked once. For me? I asked. For the office, she said. For continuity. You taught us the lesson. We won't forget it. Something warm moved through my chest, unexpected and sharp. Not sentimentality, something like respect, mutual and grown-up. They weren't just hiring me. They were institutionalizing the principle that had saved them. Continuity is not optional. Good, I said quietly. Then we'll build it. Adrian's gaze held mine. You see, he said, almost conversationally, this is why we chose you. You do not become offended when asked to replace yourself. You understand that the structure matters more than the ego. I thought of Graham, standing at the table, convinced he was building power by humiliating someone who worked in the shadows. Graham had treated ego like a weapon. Adrian treated ego like a liability. Yes, I said. I understand. Adrian sat back slightly. Then you are settled, he said. Settled. In Redwood language, it was as close to praise as you'd get. After the meeting, I walked through the office we were building. It wasn't huge. It didn't need to be. It had clean systems, secure communications, clear roles. People worked without panic. The air felt calm. That calm wasn't a luxury, it was a defensive wall. Later, when the day was done and the last email had been routed, I stood alone for a moment in my new office, looking out at the courtyard garden. Winter had thinned everything to branches and stone, but there were hints of green beneath, stubborn and patient. My phone buzzed then, not the frantic vibration from those early days, but a secure alert. A message from Victor. HR confirmed. Non-compete waived. Termination documented. You're clean. I stared at the message, and only then did I feel the last thread of Halcyon Ridge's grip slip off my skin. Clean. That night, I allowed myself one small indulgence. I opened the old group chat with 2 former colleagues I'd trusted, the ones who hadn't tried to climb over my back to look helpful. They had been quiet since the gala, not because they didn't care, but because they were smart enough to wait until the ground stopped moving. One message from Lila, dated the day of the acquisition. They're carving the place up. Northgate took the book, dumped half the staff. Drew is consulting now. Graham is gone. Everyone is pretending this was planned. I'm sorry. Also, I'm proud of you. I read it twice. Then I typed back a single line, don't be proud. Be free. Because I'd learned the difference. Halcyon Ridge had paid me to manage billionaires, but they'd never understood that the job wasn't managing money. The job was managing human weakness around money. The job was preventing ego from becoming policy. The job was protecting continuity from people who think newness is a virtue by itself. They fired me because I didn't mingle enough. But mingling is performance. It's a shallow sport with cheap trophies. What I always did, was quieter. I held the line when other people wanted to move it for applause. When I finally turned off the lights in my new office and walked out into the winter night, the air felt sharper, cleaner. I pulled my coat tighter and breathed in the cold like it was proof that I was still here. My name is Marin Caldwell, and I used to work for a firm that thought it owned relationships because it billed for them. Now I worked for a family that understood the truth. Trust isn't owned. It's earned, protected, and never weaponized for a room full of strangers. Halcyon Ridge didn't collapse because one client left. They collapsed because they showed everyone what they were willing to do in public, and the world believed them. And I didn't take revenge. I took responsibility, which, in the end, is the only kind of power that lasts. If you loved watching one whisper bring down an entire firm, hit like, subscribe, and tap the bell, then drop claws in the comments and tell me, would you have walked away or taken the triple offer?